Welcome back to the channel, everybody. It's Big Chris. I've still got the big receding hairline, unfortunately. I should really do something about this. But this weekend, I joined a tour of the Sheffield General Cemetery, and that is located here in Sheffield, Northern England. Now, the cemetery opened in 1836 and its last burial was in 1978. And the cemetery looks, well, it looks like this. Scary, creepy, wild, adventurous. I guess I will leave that decision up to you. But this is no ordinary cemetery or graveyard. This is one of Britain's great inventions of the 19th century. This is one of the brand new garden cemeteries. In the early 1800s, the industrialisation of Britain means that many of its towns and cities have expanded at a rapid pace, and the settlements are now 10 times as big as what they were prior to the Industrial Revolution. But unfortunately, this means that the death rate has also increased, and many of the original graveyards and cemeteries in the towns simply couldn't cope with all these deaths in the new industrial world. So some of the main reasons for the high mortality rate are disease. You have things such as cholera and typhoid, which when they take hold in large settlements such as Sheffield, they spread like wildfire. They are devastating to a population. Also, many Victorians weren't as religious as their ancestors, and they didn't conform to any particular religion. So, with all this being said, the solution was to create new cemeteries outside town and city limits, and this would allow the cemeteries to be large, as they were going to be built on either unused or agricultural land. So these cemeteries could be really big. I'm talking like seriously big. But when you think about large cemeteries, who wants to walk around one of these jam-packed full of graves and headstones? It's not particularly nice, and in fact they look quite boring and drab and miserable places. Where are the beautiful scenic walks and the beautiful trees and bushes? Well, these places just don't have them. And this is where the idea of the garden cemeteries came from. So many garden cemeteries were designed as, ready for this, visitor attractions from the outset. In the 1860s, Queen Victoria, she went on a carriage ride through Brompton Cemetery, whilst in 1859, Jules Verne visited Warriston Cemetery whilst on a trip to Edinburgh, where he found the tombs, and I quote, like charming cottages where life flows past leisurely and pleasant. So London's Highgate and Kensal Green, they employed their very own private police force to maintain order, since the cemetery was really busy on a Sunday, and there were reports, listen to this, reports of people picnicking in the cemetery. Now you have to remember, this is before public parks. These cemeteries weren't full of graves in the 1830s and 1840s. They were more like a sculpture park as such, with little monuments dotted around. So Highgate Cemetery, for example, they had an ad in a local paper, and it said, "We've got fantastic Egyptian architecture and the best views of the town for miles around. It is a wonderful place to visit on a Sunday, get away from the smog and the bustle of the big city." Now, this wasn't simply an attempt to improve public well-being. It was also a marketing strategy. Britain's brand new garden cemeteries began with the opening of the Rosary Cemetery in Norwich in 1819, and it expanded through the many decades to come in places such as Manchester, Liverpool, Glasgow, Newcastle, and eventually to the big city of London, where it had 7. And they were also known as the Magnificent Seven. Now, with many cemeteries being built and run by joint stock companies, the more attractive the investors could make them look, the more people would want to visit them and maybe pay for a burial plot for later on in life. So time and expense went into the cemetery's design. They were a source of pride, with many conventions about their layout and planting, as the Victorians had rules and rituals about death and mourning. So this was really important to the Victorians. Now, one area of planning the creators of the great garden cemeteries overlooked dear me, however, was the upkeep. So when the cemeteries reached their capacity, their income stream, so the money, dried up. And at around the same time, there was a shifting attitude as religious fervour also declined. So the scale of the loss during World War I saw the really big, ostentatious, individual ceremonies fall in favour for cremations, which actually rose in popularity. And as the cemeteries became increasingly neglected, the companies who also operated them also started to fall. So some closed altogether and were converted into parks, whilst others were left simply to nature, whilst many have been seen as a valued wildlife site, and these also need management. So the 18 species of bats which you can find at the Manchester Southern Cemetery and the Highgate rare orb spiders are of course wonderful and welcome, but the Japanese knotweed, not so much, so you need to manage this. Now this needs long-term income, which means that tourism is now welcome within the cemeteries. This is what I did. So you have tours, you have weddings. As more of us have started to rediscover the idea of these spaces, as the Victorians did, with their spiritual homes, and it's like a little bit of a sculpture park, but we also need to tread lightly. What's important is that the cemeteries find a way to bring in money, if possible, maintaining the rights for people to be buried within them. If this is something of a leisure or a leisure attraction, such as a scenic walk, then it's going to upset the balance of leisure and burial. So having people continue to be buried within these cemeteries is what is important. And this brings me back, we loop around all the way back to the Sheffield General Cemetery. So this is a map of the cemetery, and as you can see, everything on the right hand side is the original part of the cemetery with its Greek architecture, beautiful pleasant walks, and then everything to the left, which looks pretty bare. If you see the number 2, everything past that, well, that is where the cemetery then started to need money. So forget about the beautiful side. Now we just need cold hard cash, and that's where everybody was buried, on the left hand side. This was where, instead of having on the right hand side one burial a day, and it was beautiful horse-drawn carts, and you would have maybe 1,000 people there. Now, forget that. On the left hand side, you might have 8, 10, 15 burials in one day. It was like a production line. And over to the far left of the cemetery, a lot of the graves were dug very fast and people were just buried at a fast pace. And unfortunately, as time has gone on, a lot of the gravestones have gone missing. A lot of them have collapsed and not been replaced. So we don't actually know exactly who's buried in which plot. And to make this even worse, if you look in the bottom left hand corner, that is completely bare. Now unfortunately for the cemetery, there is a little river that runs along the bottom, and when the river floods, it means that it floods into the lower left portion of the cemetery, and nobody in Sheffield wants to see a river with some floating bodies on top. Not the nicest thought, not the nicest look as well. So all of that bottom section of the cemetery was just ploughed over because it was a mess. It was more of a bog as opposed to a cemetery. We often don't even know where a lot of those graves went. Where are the bodies? Who knows? You can look through the records and it's pretty difficult to find out where people were buried. Were they moved? Were they not moved? Who really knows? But all we know is that as we look at the map, this side of the cemetery still looks beautiful today, and the other side is pretty much bare, and it has been bulldozed with modern technology. So anyway, thank you very much for watching my video on the garden cemeteries. As I always say, I wish everybody a wonderful day. Please like, subscribe, and watch the videos in the future. I've also got some pretty cool videos that I've done in the past, and as we always say, have an amazing day. Thank you very much for watching.